L'chaim. So I have to start by saying, firstly, welcome to everyone. It's really great to have so many new faces in my house. Some of you guys have been to me, some of you are regulars, and some I've never met before, but it's really great. And if we do have chairs closer, don't bite, I promise. Yeah, come sit closer. Everybody can sit closer. You don't have to be scared of taking a seat. And so it's really great. So, and L'chaim to you guys, L'chaim to Israel. And L'chaim to you guys. L'chaim. So I just want to say thank you to Doron, and I want to say thank you to Roy, and for considering me, and Michelle behind the scenes. My journey actually with Telfed, for those of you who know the Mashovskis, Batya and Shelly and them, Batya was my madrika in Beitar, and her husband many years over. And Shelly and I were similar age, and I came on a Beitar hadrika trip when I was about 15, and I was the only kid from a not Jewish day school, and I didn't know anyone in Israel. And I think Shelly took pity on me, like this poor little girl who was in those days so shy, and she didn't know anyone, and she sort of like adopted me. And so my journey started with, you know, the Mashovskis way back when. And you know, life in Israel, when Roy asked me in March to host this, my daughter hadn't even drafted in the army, so little did I know the day her tekes would be which day? The day of this. And not only that, we have like an adopted lone soldier who was like our neighbor, and she's like our adopted lone soldier, and it's like her father said to me, can you be at her tekes? I'm like, so no. So it was like just one of these crazy days, and my husband was at medical school with the family, and it was their daughter's wedding tonight, and she's Kayla's tutor, and we couldn't be there either. So a little bit crazy. So I'm just happy that the traffic, you know, because Israel can turn into a parking lot. I walked in here at 6:57. So thank God. And you know, I just want to say, like, when I made Aliyah, say I'm 9 years into my 1 year journey. I came to try it out for a year, so I'm 9 years into my 1 year journey, but I always thought like maybe we'll go back. And then you know you're like truly Israeli the day your first child gets their tzav rishon, which is the call out for the army. You also learn something as well, that the mail, which can take 9 weeks to get from one place in Jerusalem to the next, but when it's the tzav rishon on your child's 16th and a half birthday, on time, perfect. So the mail does work when they choose to have it work. But I'm here, and my daughter Tamira, you have to come out. Senior, she just graduated from her course. I think she deserves in herself a l'chaim to be alive. And we also have another lone soldier who's staying with us at the moment, Samantha from Brazil, and where's Kayla? My other daughter is not here, and my...
Have a just look, this is, let's go to the celebrating together site. There you go.
Literally walked in from her tekes. And my son, who just recently got married, but he came to the tekes, he couldn't come. So he couldn't do both. So we... okay, so I always start my talks by making my talks in memory of my mom. So my mom passed away 2 years ago, and she was in South Africa, and it was before the vaccines and everything in COVID, and unfortunately my mother passed away, my husband's wife, my husband's mother, and my father-in-law's wife, okay. So that's, like, also passed away. We had like this crazy time. But anyway, when my mother passed away, you know, Israel put South Africa on the blacklist, so you couldn't just travel. And I've been trying to get out. Only time you see efficient bureaucracy in Israel was how quickly they denied my request to leave the country. Basically, every request, and there were only 2 flights a week, and then my mother passed away, and it took all the protectia in the whole world to get me. Like, my son called his Rosh Yeshiva, who was at a base during the Hamas war, you know, the war with like Gaza, one of the many Gaza incursions, and he called the minister of Foreign Affairs, who was like, this is ridiculous, and within like 15 minutes everybody started calling, and I got my name. Of course, now we get in the car and we go into the airport, and this is in the middle of missiles, and 9 o'clock they promised a rain of missiles, and we're driving in the car and everybody like is messaging us, do you know the airport's closed? I mean, yes, we have our own real life Star Wars. We can see it in the sky. So anyway, like I got to the airport, we weren't sure if I was going to get out, but my husband said to me, because my son was taking me, my husband's like, just go, at least there's a bomb shelter at the airport. I got on the plane and I literally arrived in South Africa, went to the restrooms, changed, I can say toilets, bathrooms, you guys know what that means, and I literally changed and I went straight to the funeral. And I was so glad I got to my mother's funeral, but also the Shiva, because at the Shiva, I learned so much. At the Shiva, my mother was a public school teacher, and then she taught at Yeshiva College and King David, and she was one of those like old school dedicated teachers that everybody came to like pay respects. But when you're a kid, and I left home when I was like 18, I moved to Israel and I got married here. When you're a kid and your mother is like that really strict teacher, and people would say like, are you Mrs. Newman's daughter? I'd be like, oh my gosh, like no. And like suddenly I saw all these people have so much respect for her. And of course, most of you are from South Africa, so you know that Joburg's falling apart, and all the neighbors would come and they say like, who's going to be the activist who's going to fight for us? My mother called the municipality, complaining the street lights aren't working, they don't know the law, and you know, like the garbage, everything. And then like the gardener came, and he arrived when he was like an illegal from Zimbabwe, and my mother like, helped him get his job and everything. He started crying and he's like, who's going to look after me? She's been my protector for like the last 30 years. And then my mother, and this is like, I think one of the significant parts, my mother was orphan, and her parents were like real Lithuanian immigrants. She was the youngest of 8 children, and her mother died when she was 6. And her father put the youngest 3 in Arcadia in the orphanage, and it really had an impact on her. And and then I saw like she was the youngest of 8 children, so of course this is South Africa, and all my cousins live all over the world, and everybody was like calling in for Zoom, and they were like, your mother was amazing, she hosted my like 25th wedding anniversary, and my this, and my that, and my bar mitzvah, and my bat mitzvah, and I suddenly saw my mother in a new light. Like I suddenly saw that I'd been stuck in my 18-year-old narrative of like my parents, and I had moved on from my narrative. Fast forward, I come to Jerusalem, I come back, and I'm at shul. We have a shul just here in Amitvayim, and I'm talking to someone, and I said, I've got to go, I'm having guests for Shabbat. And she's like, how can you have guests for Shabbat? You just come back. Look, I'm not in Shiva anymore, it's Shabbat, you don't mourn, and this is what my parents would have wanted me to do. And I was telling her a bit about my mother, and she said, Jodi, she said, you wrote a book and you dedicated it to someone else, which I will share with you. And she said, but really, your mom had a major impact in your story. And it was only in that moment that I had this like epiphany. That like my mother did have an impact on my life, and then she gave in a different way, like a way of giving. And I think for all of us, it's a lesson that we all have, especially when we make Aliyah. Sometimes we get stuck in our story. We get stuck in what South Africa was. I came from New York now, what New York was. We get stuck in our story, and sometimes we have to change our story to be successful. My next thing that I want to say is, so now I grew up in Joburg, Jewish Johannesburg. I did not grow up religious at all, where instead of wanting to be the Joneses, you want to be the Goldbergs. We all look the same, dress the same, aspire for just you like shaking your head, I get the message. And we all like, sometimes have to really explain this, you guys know what I mean, in Jewish Johannesburg. And when I was 16, I was at, I went to Eden College, which was a private school, but I was on the bus, and a cute guy with a kippah said to me, are you coming to shul on Friday night? And well, cute guy in South Africa, we used to get like kisses, b'chavas from people. I was like, oh, kiss when you're a cute guy. So I started going to shul, and my whole journey started, and I got involved in like a more religious crowd. But now all these kids were going to Israel for their after high school. In those days, people didn't go so much to Israel. I'm old. And certainly not like, you know, to go to a religious program when you weren't religious or whatever. My parents were like dead against everything. I finally convinced them. I come on my gap year, and I get here, and the Gulf War breaks out. And it's in the Gulf War, I land up going to London, and my parents want me to go home, and I don't want to go home. And my mother was talking in the staff room. She was at Yeshiva College. Some of you may know the Fachlers, Rabbi Fachler from South Africa. So my mother was speaking to his wife, and she said, my in-laws live in London. Maybe they will host Jodi. And they hosted me, and they were like a Holocaust survivor couple, and they were like the most amazing people. And they really influenced my journey, and I dedicated my book to them. So here I am. They made a conspiracy with me that I could stay in their apartment. I come back to Israel, they didn't come here. And I came back to Israel, and I went on this journey from swinging the pendulum from religious to not religious, everything. And I decided, I got kicked out of Neve. I don't know if you guys know what Neve is. It's very hard to get kicked out of Neve, but you guys will understand my dilemma. I was in Neve. And my friend's boyfriend, they're married to this day, my best friend, he brought me South African chocolates. And he came to my room to deliver the chocolates. So there was enough to get me out. And you know, there was like priorities, Neve chocolates. And I landed up deciding I didn't want to be religious, cut my skirts short, went backpacking, came back to Israel with a big heavy backpack and really short skirt. And there was a free youth hostel in the old city. And I'm walking up the stairs to go like all those stairs. And this cute soldier, tall, dark, handsome, in uniform, says to me, can I help you with your bag? So like when you're 18 and a tall, dark, handsome soldier in uniform, you think, I am not. And anyway, long story, he was like studying in Hesder Yeshiva and Kiryat Arba, and we got engaged, and we were going to live in a caravan. And you know, if you think my parents didn't like that idea of me being in Israel, well now this they definitely didn't like. And he doesn't speak English, and we're going to live in a caravan, we're going to have dirty children, I don't know, every few hours I could possibly have. And of course the Fachlers are also against it. He's Sephardic, I'm Ashkenazi, I've only been religious for about 3 weeks, and he's like an FFP, and you know, all this, so and everybody's against it, and I'm having a really serious 18-year-old conversation with my friend, sitting on a street corner, Ben Huda Street, telling him all my lifestyle dilemmas, when someone walks up to me and says, excuse me, do you speak English? And I say, yeah. And we're South Africa. And we start talking, and we realize I can know his brother and everything. And I think, just in case, I'm going back to South Africa for a few weeks. I'm going to go to Sherwood Louis, I'm going to drop my stuff off, but I'm going back to South Africa for a few weeks. Like in the back of my mind, just in case it doesn't work with Moshe. He asked me for my number. First I gave him the wrong number, crossed it out. Then I gave him another number, just in case it doesn't work. I better you know, take it. So he called me, the rest is history. That's my husband Gavin. We've been married for 29 years. And he says, like, he was just looking for directions, and I've been giving him directions ever since. It was his first trip to Israel, and he had been to the Kotel. He also, like, this was his first time, he kept Shabbat, everything.
Where was he from?
From Randford. And he was a class yappy, for those who know what that means. Anyway, he grew up in like a small town outside of Randford. Like a small little, mining town, you know, because like his grandparents came and opened stores. Correct, if I would have said Randfontein. I spoke in Australia, so the Australians are anyway, they, so he, I was saying, oh, my husband, so he said like it was the first time he had been to Israel, he put a note in the Kotel. He said he wanted to meet his wife, and he says if you go to head office you get good service. Anyway, of course my parents were much more happy because he was a doctor, he was like almost finished medical school, and he was South African, and he spoke English, so they got all the tick. So even though they still thought we'd been kidnapped by a cult and all this, it was like this cult was better than the other cult that they were going to have. Anyway, when we got like on our second date, I told him that like there were 3 things I wanted, and I told him I wanted to live in Israel, and I wanted an open home. and I want to travel the world. So those are the three things. And we agreed that, and just on that note, we've just come back from our 90th country. Kayla, my youngest, has been to 54 countries, and some of them many times. We travel kosher, shomer, Shabbat on a budget, and we host thousands of people. Some of you have been in my home. Some of you used to come to events long, long ago in New York. Some of you have been in my home for different events, but almost every Shabbat, if you come here, there's like tables all the way. There's 50, 60 people every Shabbat here for meals. We host thousands of people, literally. And we host like lots of interesting groups. Sometimes we have Chinese businessmen. We do these Hasbara groups and everything. So we definitely tick the lonely home, open home, tick the travel all around the world, and the Aliyah part. So we didn't have money. So we said we were going to go as a doctor. In those days, in the 90s, they just brought in all the Russian doctors. There were no jobs. So if you go live in these outback places, they pay lots of money. Some people know about the doctors who go to like outback Australia and Saskatchewan and all these like that. So we went to all these places in Australia and New Zealand where we literally had to like squeeze grapes to make grape juice. We made we lived in literally the middle of nowhere. Gavin can tell you stories how he did, like he'd fly into like a, he'd fly in and do a surgery, and this is before like internet and everything, with the base hospital on the phone and a nurse holding a textbook open, and he was trained at Baragwana, so only a South African doctor who's been in like a hospital in Soweto, and like in 6-year medical school you're already doing these procedures at their own land. So, that's why they take South African doctors in these jobs, because they can do the job. And we lived in all these places, and then finally we made it to all different places in Australia. We lived in places that no Aussies have ever been to, and we finally went to Tasmania, and we finally got to Sydney. And we won green cards in the green card lottery. A lot of people don't know, but 50,000 people a year win green cards, and it's like a diversity green card. They ask you which country, your country of nativity, is your main criteria, and like you just put in your name and address and everything. And there's a greater allocation for Africans, and of course how many people in deep dark Africa actually know or read The Economist magazine or these places where they advertise the green card. So of course it's skewed, and we won a green card. We arrive in New York, but the time, so we get to New York in 2000, and we'd been in New York just a couple of weeks, and I realized there was this need for like foreign Jews to have this like Jewish home away from home. And I started hosting events, and when I was staying with the Fatlas in London, I didn't even have money to buy them like a bottle of wine at the time. I was like the student, and my parents had like cut me off, you're known if you want to stay. And I said to them, how am I ever going to repay your hospitality? And they said, one day you'll pay it forward. So this is the gift that keeps giving and giving. So I've been paying their hospitality forward. And we arrived in New York, and I realized there was this need for this like Jewish home away from home. We started an organization that's now in 4 cities. We have about 10,000 people come through the door, and we've just had 140 marriages through my organization. And I say, and this is really important, we could solve the singles crisis if all the events served a lot of good red wine, because when the wine talks, everyone becomes cuter, and they're less worried if someone's tall or short. So I'm not a matchmaker, but I run lots of like meaningful events, and I get people to connect. We get them to drink wine. So let's hi. So basically, we're living in New York. We started this organization, and we have this like open home where, like this, we always have guests in and out our home, and we've got like, just to give you an idea how open our home was, for those of you who've lived in New York or been to New York, all the buildings have doormen. And like after living in my building for like quite a few years, and the doorman seeing like all the, shopping come in and groceries come in and out, and all the guests, he's like, I know what you do. He's like, you run a soup kitchen for Jewish people, don't you? Kind of a soup kitchen, like a spiritual soup kitchen of sorts. But I think, we had like 2 adorable children, And we had good jobs, and if you would have asked the singles to come to our home, we were just like the Samuels. February 25th, 2008. And this actually just reminds me of something, okay? Because before I go into my dramatic story, I realized that I didn't say thank you to all the volunteers and Cecile when I said all my thank yous, and all the volunteers who I didn't even get to meet in my crazy life who came to help, and to the crash students, because when I start talking about my daughter, I think of my crash student Kayla, who is the most amazing person, and she's been part of our life for 5 years. And if it wasn't for Kayla, who was here today, thank you Cecile, she's there. If it wasn't for Kayla, who holds fort in my house, and when we have to travel, she comes to help us out. And today I'm like, Kayla, I just need you here because I'm not going to be home. And so it's been like a 5-year friendship. So we have Kayla and Kayla. So I just wanted to mention that before I completely forgot in the beginning, because I spilled wine in my notes, so I couldn't see them. Okay, so here we are, 2008. 2008, we're living in New York. We've got this great life. February 25th, 2008, Kayla's born. On day 4 of her life, day 3 of her life, the doctor walks in and he says the words that would change our lives. He said, Mrs. Samuels, did you do genetic testing? And he didn't have to like say what it was. I'd had like, this was a cesarean, I sat bolt upright. I just knew what he was going to say. I had a mother's intuition when I was about 6 weeks from being due date. I remember where I was sitting. I still get the like same visceral reaction when I think of it. And I knew something was wrong. And I came home, and of course I'm married to a doctor, so if it's not like, you know, he's like, all your tests are fine, everything, if it's not like in a double-blind study and like documented in a medical journal or objective proof, it doesn't exist. And I was like, no, I know something's wrong. And he was like, no, all the tests are fine and everything. And I was like, well, autism doesn't show up on a test, this doesn't like blindness, whatever. Anyway, I went to the doctor and I was like crying, I made him come with, and she's like, oh, you're so strong normally, like why are you, like, and I was like, something's wrong. And they were like, Jodi, you're just like being neurotic. When they were prepping me for the cesarean, the C-section, I think I wasn't like praying, God, please give me a healthy child. I was like, God, please give me the strength to deal with what comes my way. So when the doctor walks in and he says these words, I sort of knew. And I actually have a first cousin with Down syndrome. And when he suggested Down syndrome, I like had absolute terror, because I was one of these people who was like, my cousin freaked me out. Like, I only saw a few times a year. She was born in the 70s. My aunt was like, you know, advised to put her in the Selwyn Siegel and the Jewish home for like the disabled. And if I saw these people at shul, like I couldn't look at them. It wasn't comfortable for me. And now this is my reality. Like I had absolute terror. Like, and I was like, here I am, this hostess extraordinaire, and I'm a world traveler. By the time my kids were born, I'd been to like 40 countries and maybe more. And I don't know, and I was like, I've got, you know, and I wanted to be this entrepreneur, and I want to be on the front page of Fortune and Forbes and Business Week, and I hadn't made it there. What does it mean for my family? What does it mean for Kayla's siblings? And I went to the restroom, and I looked in the mirror, and I had to have an honest conversation with Jodi. And I think this is another lesson for all of us. Sometimes we all hear our echo chambers, we hear what Facebook says. For those of us who are younger, we hear what our mother says. For those of us who are teenagers, they roll their eyes at us. We all hear like other things, the noise. But sometimes we don't have an honest conversation with ourselves. Like, who are we? Like, what do we want? And I ask myself, like, what kind of mother do I want to be? What kind of wife do I want to be? What kind of, legacy do I want to leave for my kids? And I remembered the words of Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. And I think this is a message that applies to all of us who've ever made Aliyah and living here. We begin to achieve greatness when we pass our values on to the next generation. For some of us living here, it's very hard to always like see that, but you see it in your children flourishing and becoming. And, you know, I think for me, I came out and I told my husband, and everybody was on the same page, and and we said, we also realized we're going to live in a world that if you don't like what you see, you have to be the one who makes the change. And I think that's why in Israel you have something like 37,000 not-for-profit organizations, because people here come as like the people who want to make change. Like, everybody here has come to build and to make it. You don't like what you see, so instead of complaining, be the change. So when we walked out of the hospital, they check your hospital band to make sure you're not stealing the child. And as we walked out, my husband said they should have just branded activist on our forehead. And he was prophetic, because little did he know that like just one day later, on Kayla's 4th day of life, a neighbor, a religious neighbor in New York would walk in, and I can't do the New York accent, no matter how many years I lived there, and then she was like, what? You didn't do an amniocentesis and abort? I'm not holding the baby, I'm like, no. I'm going to say. But soon we learned that people say the most stupid things. My husband wanted to have a t-shirt made for Kayla saying, I have an extra copy of chromosome 21 with the cancel my mental retardation. What's your excuse? Anyway, when Kayla was 2, we wanted to go to the same Jewish day school her siblings went to. The answer was no, they locked us out. And it was very hard for us, because here we've chosen our Jewish journey, we've chosen everything, we're activists, we're involved in the community, and the answer is no. And we decided, no, we're not going to accept this as an answer, and we went to the board and we went to protest, and they were like, the answer's still no. And our mantra became, we're not asking you to do what's easy, but you're asking you to do what's right. Anyway, those of you who read my book, you need a good glass of wine when you get to that part of the story. It was a long and very tormentous journey. But a lot of it included, people would like attack me. It'd be like the kosher supermarket, Erev Shabbat. Jodi, what do you think your other kids will think of you? And I said, what my other kids will think? That I'll always go into bat for them. I'll always stand up for what's right. And sometimes that's just what you have to do in life, and when you're living in Israel, people are like, oh, why did you move here? It's like crazy, and it's this and this. Sometimes you just have to do what you believe is right and stand up for what you believe is right. Anyway, this culminated for me in a moment when I got an email. You know how you never put anything in email that you don't want for all eternity? And a board member sent me a message saying, you chose to bring this problem into the world. Don't make this problem our problem. And I was like, no, God brought this problem into the world. How you choose to treat her is your choice. Anyway, it was in that moment, it happened to be like this grey, dreary day in New York, and it was Martin Luther King Day. And one of the things, there was like this big sign. I walked outside, and there was this big sign from Martin Luther King Day saying, we begin to die when we're silent about the things that matter. And that was for me like a moment when I realized I have to take a stand. And I know this is very hard for you seeing me here, but I was this exceptionally quiet, shy girl who never spoke publicly. I would host events and everything, I never was like this public speaker. If you would have asked any teacher from school, they called me the church mouse, I never said a word. And I think that was my lights, camera, action moment. I started running these forums, and I started being interviewed by the media, and I realized it was me. If I was going to do something for my daughter, it was going to be me who made the change. So that was the beginning of my journey to be like a disability advocate and activist. Finally, we got into school, and I went to the Chabad school that was in my neighborhood, and they were like, oh, you have 2 other children, how come you didn't send them to our school? And I said, well, actually, I said, my lips started quivering, and I said, they don't want to. And she said, every Jewish child's entitled to a Jewish education. She's accepted, this interview's over. And I think that's another lesson for all of us. it's leadership that counts. Like there was 2 schools, same city, same like New York City Board of Education package of unbelievable services. One was yes, one was no. And I think for all of us, it's so important to put ourselves in the environment, the community, the leaders that have the right framework. So, okay, like let me just collect my thoughts. And then, okay, so fast forward, we're in Israel 2014. And I say Hamas was my aliyah shaliach because I had become a princess in Manhattan. And like this 2-year plan to move to Israel, I was like, my husband always wanted to move. And I had 2 significant conversations. We were here in the summer, and my 12-year-old son said to me, so Ima, we were waiting for a bus on a Shabbat, like after the first bus at the kotel. He was like, yeah, he was like, Ima, where do you think we'll live? He says, like, I tell my friends, like option A, we'll move to the suburbs, because my husband didn't want to live in Manhattan anymore. Option B, we'll move to Israel. Option C, Ima will come up with some other crazy idea. So, and I said, well, we're never going to come to Israel, not until Kayla's finished school. And he looked at me, and he's 12 at the time. He's like, Ima, that's like 12 or 13 years. By then, we'll all be married with children living in Israel. I was like, well, I didn't think about being a grandmother quite then. But he like put it in perspective. And second, it was when the 3 boys are being kidnapped. And it was also the World Cup soccer. And Israelis are like soccer mad, as you know, and everybody was out on the street and they're watching they had all these huge screens. I say the best thing for Middle East peace is soccer. You see Haredim, Arabs, Jews, everyone standing around a soccer screen. Anyway, everybody's gathered there, and there's this huge vibe, and the next thing there's something on the screen and dead silence. So like me, this Bolsheva, I couldn't even read Hebrew in those days. Like I hadn't even looked at it. And I said to my son, what does that say? And he said, like, they found the body of the 3 boys. And it was amazing how the whole country went from party, like there was suddenly dead silence, and like the whole, and I just realized that like I wanted to live in a more meaningful society. And I came home, my husband was traveling just like he is tonight. He's in New York right now. So I realized like I want to live in a more meaningful society. And I said to him, he was shocked. That wasn't what he was expecting. That was like towards the end of our summer. We came back to New York, put our kids in school. And after talking about Aliyah for 22 years, we moved in 2 weeks. So everybody said to us, it doesn't matter if you come Achrei Chagim, nothing happens to Achrei Chagim. So we basically made the decision on Erev Rosh Hashanah. We left the day after Yom Kippur, and my kids started school the day after Sukkot. And like only in Israel do you move into an apartment that you didn't have a lease for, you didn't have anything. I posted on like a Facebook group, anybody got linen for us, and people like dropped stuff off because like nothing had arrived yet. Anyway, only in Israel. I've been here a week, and for those of you who are South Africans, you know the Shabbat project's a big thing, the Shabbos project. And I'm like, so what's happening for the Shabbat project? They're like, yeah, no, nothing happens in Jerusalem. And what do you mean nothing happens? And like, yeah, we don't do it in Jerusalem. I'm like, 400 cities are participating, and the eternal capital of the Jewish people doesn't have an event. And they're like, so I started sending messages to everybody I knew. This was the day my kids started school. I wake up at like 5 o'clock in the morning, I send messages, and like I keep pressing send and receive in case my messages didn't go out. No one responds. Finally, another friend who was in New Orleans said, okay, let's do something. And she was the person, you probably know, the Newfields, Nikki. So Nikki responded, and she was like, anyway, we landed up advertising on Tuesday. We got 600 people to a challah break on the Thursday. We had a young professional Shabbat dinner that Friday, and we had 300 people at a Havdalah on Saturday. So within a week of being here, our organization had launched, and the rest is history. So I say, moving to Israel was definitely harder than getting a diagnosis of a special needs child. For that, like I had a purpose, I understood, God had a role for me. when I met her, I was like, like I just cried. I was like, and that's when my mantra became, God, give me coffee to deal with the things I can, and wine to deal with the things I can't. And that was really my Aliyah mantra. And I'll tell you like a story, like so much so that, you know, I guess we had a play therapist. My daughter went to Makaspoishim. And we brought her in the summer, so we knew them. And like after being here a few months, I get a call from the play therapist, and she's like, can you and your husband come and see me? And I was like, I felt like we were being summoned, because usually she just sent me like a WhatsApp. And of course, when you get to Israel, you don't realize everything happens on WhatsApp. And everything's last minute, but like I get a day before message on WhatsApp, can you and your husband come see me? And I said to Gavin, I feel like we're being summoned. And we get to this meeting, we're talking, and she's like, do you mind closing? She says to Kayla, do you mind going out? And then she's like, do you mind closing the door? And she goes, we've been friends for a long time. So I feel like I can be honest. So I'm like, okay, my heart's like pounding, like what's she going to tell me? My child is like, I don't know, abused, I don't know, you know, like everything goes in. She goes, when Kayla plays with dolls, she always says, Mommy loves wine. I just want to say, you know, Aliyah, it's been stressful for you. If you turn to the bottle, we can offer support services. I'm like, no, I'm not an alcoholic, but I am a stressed out all so, yeah, so that was like, that's my true story about wine. But I think that for me, you know, like Aliyah was definitely a huge challenge. And so Aliyah was definitely like one of the hugest challenges for me. And I think that, you know, moving to Israel takes a lot of changing your story and a lot of readjustment. So people say to me, so where did you get like your strength and your resilience and everything to do everything? So firstly, let me tell you, I couldn't do everything I do in my life, and I have a really crazy life, and I run hundreds of events, and I travel backwards and forwards between New York, and I came back last night, and I like, my life is really, anybody who knows me, like Ryan and Kayla, and I have the most chaotic life, but I couldn't do it if I didn't have a good husband, good kids, and good help and good volunteers in my life. I just couldn't do it. So like I really couldn't, so I really appreciate all the people who make this possible. But you know, it's definitely like really a challenge, and I say like, so people say to me, is like, oh, your book, like the name of your book, Terry was asking me. So I'm like, Chutzpah, Wisdom and Wine. It's a catchy name, but it's also my life philosophy. So by the way, there's books there. And I'm not, like I usually charge 70 shekels. I'm asking anybody who takes a book, please make a donation to Telfed for the 70 shekels to Telfed, okay? So that's my, but so if you do take a, we'll rely on an honesty system, but please, I'm happy to sign them, whatever. So, so Chutzpah, Wisdom and Wine is really my, thank you, is really my life philosophy. Sorry guys. I just come back from New York where the pollen was everywhere and I have the worst allergies. Okay, so Chutzpah. Come on, you guys live in Israel. What's Chutzpah?
Essential.
Essential? Definitely to live in Israel.
Survival.
Survival. You see, Israelis have such a different perspective.
Aggressiveness.
Aggressive.
Israeli.
Okay, so it's funny that she says it, because you know, like I'm like, you know, chutzpah is bold. When I'm speaking to, I speak to a lot of non-Jewish groups and groups from all around the world, and I say like chutzpah is like bold, audacious, but I say to people before I say that, I say like, so what's chutzpah? And they all shout out, Israeli. But you guys live in Israel, so you have a more nuanced perspective of what chutzpah is. So for me, chutzpah is, what is chutzpah? Firstly, it's the lack of the fear of the word no. In fact, In Israel, the word no is the starting point of a negotiation. In other countries, no means no. Here, I was like, what do you mean? I watched this Israeli guy on the plane the other night. He like negotiated. He wanted to sit in like, I don't know, premier economy or whatever, but it was empty. And he was like, and the woman's like, well, you have to pay for that. But he's like, but it's empty. And eventually, he like drove her so crazy, you should just let him sit there. You know, it's like the other like South Africans. We're like, no. Everything's like, I'm sorry. We don't even say, like, excuse me, I'm sorry. You know, Israelis like lack of the fear of the word no. Okay. The other thing is that rules are mere suggestions. I mean, anybody's ever gone to like a lot during peak camping season, no camping on the beach, so the Israelis all take their tents down. I'm not camping, I'm sitting on my plastic sheeting the second the police are gone up. You know, like, so rules are just mere suggestions.
It's like a line in Israel.
It's like a line in Israel, it's for sure mere suggestions. Have you ever seen Israelis overseas, they stand in line, you get to the check-in counter at LL, there's no more line. Like, it doesn't matter where in the world they are, suddenly there's no more line.
My husband always just said rules are made to be broken.
Totally, rules are like, they're just mere suggestions. There's no such a thing as a rule. But we actually had this Israeli guy moved to New York, and Gavin was talking to me, and he was like, it's so hard. We're like, we think Israel's hard. What's hard about New York? He's like, when you go somewhere, if they say no, it's no. Everything's like according to the documents. Like there's no negotiation. We're like, yeah, that's what we like. At least we know what to expect. And I'm like here, it's like, you know, talking about changing the story. You've got to redefine your whole life and your whole perspective of reality when you get here, especially when you're like South African, you're so polite and you like everything according to the rules and we don't argue. So what else is chutzpah? Okay, chutzpah is about resilience. And I think like there's nothing more than like in the start of nation that really defines chutzpah. Like we're all about resilience. Chutzpah is about really believing that it's the journey, not just the destination. I think if Israelis had to always believe that there was only one end goal, it's about really believing that the journey counts as well. It's about believing that you can make change, no matter what. Having the resilience, you can make change. But one of the things, like I hate the thing when they say, oh, the sky's the limit. Why does the sky have to be the limit? Like, do you think these Israeli startups all said, the sky's the limit? They're like, no, the sky's the starting point. Like, why is the sky the limit? The other thing that I think is really chutzpah is like, you know, think outside the box. No. Why should there be a box in the first place? Why should, like, you know, that's so Israeli. And I think that my last point on chutzpah is that truly believing that tomorrow can be better. Nobody could live in this country if you didn't believe. Nobody would have lived here in 1948. No one would have lived here. Like, I mean, I joke and I say, I do not know how people made Aliyah when there was like food stamps, swamps, no air conditioning. I'm not talking about how did they make Aliyah before Waze, before Netflix, before Google Translate. Although like Google translates its own language, you know, when you move here and you don't speak Hebrew and then you put everything. I have to say, my family are an exercise in chutzpah and also exercise in survivor. I asked my Aliyah teacher, how do you say survivor? And then I was like, actually, how do you say series in survivor? Because like, I think Kayla, surviving inclusion school here, gone from like private school in New York, everything to like 30 kids in the class with like, you know, one teacher and a part-time shadow. She's like really exercises in survivor. But even when we made Aliyah, my 12-year-old kid, every single night had to be like, you know, when you have a special needs kid, you're constantly on the phone with the school, and he had to be the translator, you know, because we didn't speak Hebrew, they didn't speak English, and my 12-year-old son was the person, but then it's Google, and then you get Google and you're like, Okay, so the first day of school. Firstly, we had to learn that Jodi and Gavin in Google Translate are Goody and John. And her sayat particular is frame. You have to learn, and then like they were like, so her first sayat, she had like the teacher writes this thing. She's like, well, we welcome this new girl. She arrived at spring. Okay, if all the kids tomorrow can bring a fall leaf. I'm like, but she arrived in spring. How does she bring Mayan spring? You know, I didn't realize, like, you know, because Google Translate, I get these messages like, so, Kayla, but the kid, but Kayla. Or like, I mean, I can't even tell you how many things, or you get these messages from B'nai Akiva and they come in like colloquial, like language. So Google Translate, the more formal, the better the translation. But it'll be like, dear young lovers and sirens, tomorrow we meet at sit, and then this whole message that with all the slang that goes LLLO, Google Translate, and I'm like, and then it says, we're looking forward to seeing all the stags. And I'm like, so my son Miron was forever like, help, translate, because I never knew what was going on. It's gotten better, but it's still like, you know, today I had a meeting at school, and we speak in my Hebrew, which just shows how scary the level of English in the school is when we speak in my Hebrew. And I'm like, guys, pretend you're speaking to someone in Kita Aleph. And then they start speaking fast. I'm like, no, pretend I'm in Kita Aleph. So anyway, it's like, you know, you have to really have chutzpah and exercise and resilience. For me, the wisdom for me is Torah wisdom. Now, I didn't grow up religious. I got kicked out of Neve. I didn't have so much like, you know, formal Jewish education. But whatever I have learned, you know, I say like my life is like a modern Jewish woman living according to ancient Jewish values. But, you know, it's so important to have your wisdom. We saw during COVID and elections in Israel, you know, I live like sort of in the valley here below the president's house. On a Saturday night, you just hear the two different groups, Democratia, screaming at each other, and the flags and the left and the right marching against each other. But at the end of the day, you have to know what your wisdom is, and Torah provides you that, like, you have to know what your why is. And I think when you live in Israel, it is so important to know what your why is. Why are you here? Not how am I here, what am I doing here, but why. Because when you understand that why, it gives you a much broader framework. And when we like travel a lot, like, so when we were in the Himalayan mountains, we were like, there's trips called the Hummus Trail, where all the post-army Israeli soldiers go on the Hummus Trail, they call it. And we got lost, and we saw this monk. And we asked him for like directions, and he, a Buddhist monk, he insisted we come to his like tiny little garden, and he served us tea. And he was talking to us, and he said, he was telling us about all the Israelis, and he says he always meets these Israelis, and they always say to him, please tell me about like Buddhism. And he's like, first know your wisdom. When you know your wisdom, come back, and then I will tell you my wisdom. And I think we all need to know what our wisdom is. I don't always speak to Jewish groups, but I say you need to know what your wisdom is. You know, you can get whiplash going from like one TV channel to the next, from CNN to Fox, you know, COVID, really, like, you have to know who you are, what your wisdom is. And for me, wine. So as you can hear, Chutzpah, wisdom and wine, it's an important part of my life, and I really believe that wine could solve the singles crisis. It helps the aliyah stresses. But I also think that wine for me, like obviously we have like spiritual significance in Judaism and a sacramental reasons that we have wine. But for me, wine is that ability to stop and appreciate. Because I think so often we're just in this rat race, and we're this employer or employee or parent or social, you know, child psychologist, social worker, gardener, laundry lady, and all the roles that we lead in life. And sometimes we just don't stop and appreciate. And I think wine is like metaphorically that like ability to appreciate. So I want to say that, you know, before, like since COVID, we've all learned something. What have we learned since COVID? Come on, there was one enduring lesson of COVID.
All in it together.
We're on it together, okay.
Hashem runs the world.
Hashem, okay. These are things very relevant to living in Israel. So I say, like, you know, we've learned one thing in life, and that is we don't know anything for sure. There's absolutely nothing we know for sure. And I thank Kayla for teaching me this lesson long before COVID, because Kayla taught me that we can all pivot in the face of change. Talking about you, Kayla. We can all pivot in the face of change, and we can all lead extraordinary lives. And Kayla taught me, and I think this is the most enduring lesson for Aliyah, for all of us, life doesn't have to be perfect to be wonderful. L'chaim. You guys can follow me. There's Katie's World, there's
My Instagram?
Katie's World. Yeah, you can follow Kayla on Instagram, Facebook, Katie's World.
Katie's Crown, right now.
That's your other name on Instagram. You can also follow, Jodi's Voice. Also my organization, JRCNY. I would love you guys to stay in touch. Happy to be in touch with all of you. And I'm also very honest. If anyone wants to ask me any questions, you can. But I think the most important announcement is that you all have Jewish moms at some point. And you all are Jewish moms, or some of you are Jewish moms. And how do you make a Jewish mom happy?
Why?
You eat all their food, okay? So you guys are not allowed to eat until you've eaten all the food. And according to Kayla, drunk wine as well. And any questions, I'm happy to take.
But she tells the teacher the truth. You do think a lot of it.
I do. I'm just not an alcoholic. The whole truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Any questions? Oh, Kayla's got cards. If anybody wants cards, she's my PR agent. Okay, so guys, any questions? Otherwise, you're welcome to help yourself.